Now, in the latest countrywide demonstration against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's planned judicial overhaul, Israeli protesters have now blocked highways and gathered outside Tel Aviv's stock exchange and military headquarters. The day of disruption comes as longtime allies of the Prime Minister pushed a contentious piece of legislation through a parliamentary committee ahead of a vote expected next week. However, additional protests are planned throughout the day. Following nationwide stunts, thousands marched from Habima Square to the Tel Aviv Stock Market Exchange building. Dozens entered the building, tossing fake banknotes as symbols of corruption. Police reported a half a dozen highway closures by demonstrators and made at least 17 arrests. Medics further said a woman was hit by a car and injured.
Government is trying to take from us.
Demonstrators, many of them who were military reservists, created human chains and blocked one of the entrances to the Kiryat, Israel's military headquarters in central Tel Aviv.
We are citizens of Israel, serving in the army, paying taxes. We're here to say to Israel's government, the more you press, the harder we resist. We are saying no to dictatorship, and it will not pass.
Netanyahu heads the most ultra-nationalist and religiously conservative government in Israel's 75-year history. He proposed a series of drastic changes to the country's judiciary shortly after taking office in December. The weekly mass protests led Netanyahu to suspend the overhaul in March. But he decided to revive the plan last month after compromise talks with the opposition collapsed. The proposed laws would grant lawmakers greater control over the appointment of judges and give parliaments the powers to overturn high court decisions and pass laws impervious to judicial reviews. Bibi and his allies say the measures are necessary to curb an over-activist Supreme Court comprised of unelected judges. However, critics say the judicial overhaul will concentrate power in the hands of Netanyahu and his allies and undermine the country's system of checks and balances. They also say Netanyahu has a conflict of interest because he is on trial for charges of fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes. And for more on this, our correspondent Jody Cohen is joining us live from Tel Aviv. Hi, Jody, good to see you. We are reporting that hundreds of Israelis have blocked highways and the army headquarters in Tel Aviv. Can you confirm this to us, and what's the latest on that front?
Hi, Eric. Yes, so I'm actually looking at the army headquarters now. It's just here. That was blocked for about 1 hour earlier this morning. We're seeing that there are pockets of protests going on around the country. They tend to last for an hour or two, and then they move on. Some people go before work, go to work, and then at the end of the day come back. Now, right now I'm at the Hashalom train station, and this is something new. The protesters are planning to block key train stations across the country, which is something that they haven't done before. Actually, behind me, there are some protesters for the judicial reforms, as well as protesters against the judicial reforms, and there have been some lively debates going on here. We've heard that there are now 19 arrests that have been made across the country. One protester who was in the city of Ra'anana, they accidentally got hurt as they were coming out of their car. Again, that was earlier this morning. This is the 28th week of the protest. They're calling this a day of resistance as opposed to a day of disruption. And that seems to suggest that they were hoping for an uptick in the protest. I have to say that here in the main square, which they've renamed now as Democracy Square, it was actually empty. The police had blocked it off for the protesters. They were expecting a protest at 11 o'clock local time. Very, very few people turned up. They were elsewhere. It hasn't been the full day of mass protests that we have seen in the past. And there is some talk now of potentially the government and the opposition coming to some potential compromise on this reasonableness bill. That is what we're hearing right now, that's being discussed.
Well, Jody, two events are currently happening apart from the protests. Israel's president is about to hold talks with U.S. President Joe Biden at the White House. Consequently, Biden did call Benjamin Netanyahu and sent an invitation. What's the message the United States is trying to send here?
So I think there's been two key messages. Number one is that there are close relations between Israel and the United States, particularly when it comes to intelligence and security cooperation. And the second message is really that there's been some tensions between the Biden and Netanyahu administrations, although they might not overtly say that. There hasn't been an in-person meeting yet between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, although, as you said, President Biden phoned Netanyahu in advance of his meeting with President Herzog today, and he's reportedly extended an invitation to Prime Minister Netanyahu to visit the U.S. at some point. Now, we know that there are differences of opinion when it comes to issues such as the judicial reform plans, such as the issue of settlements, also a potential return to the Iran nuclear deal. But that phone call between the two, they discussed these issues, but there was a positive tone from the readout from both countries, and they're likely also to continue those discussions in the meeting between President Biden and President Herzog.
Well, live from Tel Aviv, our correspondent Jody Cohen, thank you.
Thank you.